Alright team, welcome to another episode of the Exceptional Leadership Podcast. As always, I'm your host Matt Hamilton, delighted to have your company with me once again for an episode where we're once again going to dive into the questions section on the leadership forums on Reddit, because this is a goldmine. And we've had somebody submit a question today which really got my attention. Essentially, it centers around imposter syndrome, which I have talked about on this show before and I've experienced personally, as I'm sure every single one of you listening to this show has. This person has titled the question as follows. They said, struggling with self-image as a new leader. And I want to unpack this one a little bit more and see if we can bring this person a little bit of assistance. So without further ado, here is the question as they've written it. They go on to say, I recently stepped into the executive director role at my non-profit after working there for over 15 years in a support position. When our last ED resigned, the board asked me to take over. What I didn't realise at the time was that one board member had hoped to get the job herself. The board later opened the position for interviews. I applied and I was ultimately selected. In my previous role, I felt confident and capable, but now that I'm in the spotlight, instead of embracing it, I feel self-conscious and insecure, even down to the things like the way I look and dress. It's almost like I'm struggling to see myself as someone in charge, and it is messing with my self-image. It's not that I'm not capable, as I actually am doing the job to a high level. It's more mental. Has anyone else experienced this kind of transition, and how did you navigate it? What a fantastic question. It shows this person is eager to learn and improve and get a better result. So as I said, imposter syndrome is something that we've discussed on the show a couple of times, but it is such a common experience, isn't it, for people, not just in the workplace. It can be in numerous settings. I'll give you a personal example. Some of you may recall me mentioning that I am into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I've been doing that for a number of years now, and within that martial art there is a ranking system from white through to black belt. And when you get to a particular belt rank, say purple belt, which is about 5 years into your tenure in the martial art, you are often asked to start taking classes. And that is a very intimidating thing for people to navigate because of imposter syndrome, because you'll often find yourself not rocking up to classes now just to learn. You're actually rocking up to explain techniques and develop lesson plans for more junior practitioners. And there's a lot of things coming together there. There's the fact that your knowledge and the way that you explain things is on full display in front of people who have been doing it a lot longer than you at the black belt level. That's intimidating in itself. And there is the public speaking aspect of that as well. So it is quite a notable transition point. So from a teaching perspective in real world settings outside of the workplace, I think that's a really good example of another place where you might have some sort of imposter syndrome. A lot of people are very intimidated by that. So it is common. It's something that everybody feels. As I mentioned, I've had it before as well on numerous occasions. But we can overcome it. And I thought to help us delve into this question and give some answers, I thought we could have a look from a scientific and theoretical perspective, the things that might contribute towards somebody feeling imposter syndrome. So firstly, done a little bit of research, and cognitive biases are mentioned as a bit of a risk factor, if you like. So people can attribute success to luck or external help, but blame failures on themselves while also discounting achievements and chasing perfection. Now that is notable because it suggests that if you have a tendency to attribute your success, which may well have been achieved through hard work and dedication, but instead of seeing that value in yourself, you tend to attribute it to just luck or what other people have done to help you along the way. But then also simultaneously blame all the negatives on yourselves while discounting your own achievements. That is a risk factor, and that might resonate with a few of you, that internal dialogue being perhaps overly critical. Then to segue quite nicely, we come to personality and upbringing as a potential contributing factor. You might be someone who is highly self-critical. You might have perfectionism tendencies, and achievement-linked validation in childhood can set the stage for imposter syndrome. So highly self-critical, a perfectionist. And why that's important to note is because it means that you link your validation and self-worth to what you achieve. And therefore, you're highly self-critical when you are unable to do a good job in your eyes. Doesn't matter what everybody else thinks. You might be your biggest critic. Then there's some brain factors. We're going to get a little bit sciencey here, so bear with me. But overactive error monitoring, heightened anxiety circuits, that'll be in the amygdala, and a muted reward response tendency, I suppose you could say, so dopamine linked, might reinforce any self-doubt that you have. So that, I suppose, is more of a genetic sort of brain function aspect to this. And then we have social and cultural context. So minority stress and competitive or unsupportive workplaces could amplify feelings of fraudulence. So that might be, for example, just to unpack that for us a little bit more, it might be a setting where perhaps your superior, okay, that you report to, your senior leader, maybe they are a personality that has a short fuse or is not particularly patient when it comes to mistakes. So when you're in the spotlight and you're leading people for the first time, or you've been elevated to a senior position, perhaps that represents a bit of a step up for you, maybe the person that you report to that's watching you like a hawk, maybe they fill you with a bit of unease. And maybe that makes things a little bit more difficult from an imposter syndrome perspective. So it is, in short, a mix of biased thinking, It's a mix of biased thinking, personality tendencies, brain wiring, and social pressures that create a loop of self-doubt. But I want to dig down a little bit further and get into the evolutionary aspects of perhaps why we've evolved this way to experience imposter syndrome anyway. And social survival advantage pops up as one of the reasons why we might experience this in the first place. Because if we think about it, in ancestral environments, belonging to the group and not standing out was crucial for survival. Displaying humility and self-doubt may have prevented individuals from appearing arrogant or threatening, which helped maintain social bonds and reduce conflict. So we could in fact be dealing with some really deep programming here from a mental perspective. Then we have our error detection as a safety mechanism. So overactive self-monitoring, which is driven by the anterior cingulate cortex in the brain, may have evolved to keep us cautious and alert to mistakes. Not hard to see why that would be beneficial. This hyper-awareness could have been adapted in dangerous environments because it's safer to overestimate risk, and that includes your own shortcomings rather than to be overconfident. So this is going all the way back to the earliest days of human evolution and a pure survival setting. This could explain why we've arrived where we have from a mental perspective, right down to that fight or flight level, the reptilian brain. Then we have motivation to improve. So feelings of inadequacy can push individuals to work harder, learn more, and seek approval. This is what I would say is the beneficial aspect of this personality trait. And it may have boosted chances historically of survival and reproductive success. If you are the sort of person that, due to that self-criticism, due to that internal wiring, you are naturally inclined to work harder, learn more, and seek approval. Very interesting. And then finally, the cost of overconfidence must be considered from an evolutionary perspective. So from that perspective, overconfidence can be fatal. We mentioned that a little bit earlier. So examples might be underestimating predators, overestimating hunting ability. And then imposter-like self-doubt may have acted as a protective check against risky overconfidence. Curiosity killed the cat might be a little anecdote that comes to mind. So in short, scientists suggest imposter syndrome could be a byproduct of evolved mechanisms that favoured caution, humility, and social harmony, all traits that historically increase survival chances, even if they create stress in modern contexts. So there we go. From a historical perspective, evolutionary perspective, that might give us a little bit of insight into why we deal with this stuff in the first place. I think when it comes to stress and anxiety and things like this that are uncomfortable, it does help to get a bit of understanding as to why they're occurring in the first place, rather than assuming that there's something wrong with you. You know, the reality is that the vast majority of normal people are probably going to feel exactly the same thing. And I think for this person who submitted the question, where she says that she's even thinking about, the way that she's presenting herself, what she's wearing. Actually, I don't even know if it was a he or a she. Apologies to the person who submitted the question. These Reddit usernames don't give a lot away sometimes. So let's just go with it. Let's just assume it's a she, just because we're already on that track. It doesn't really matter, does it? When she's talking about the way that she's dressing and overthinking the way that she's presenting herself, that shows really that she's in the weeds mentally when it comes to her anxiety around this sort of stuff. So I guess what we want to talk about is, firstly, what's the positives of this? Let's not look at it as all negative. And then how do we get on a little bit more sure footing now that we understand that it's normal and you're not experiencing anything particularly unique? So firstly, I think it's good that you're feeling this, because it shows me that you're taking the job seriously. It is a step up. It's a challenge. And we know that when you step outside of the comfort zone, so to speak, using a generic cliche, but it is true, that is where your growth begins. So it is good that you are in a challenging situation and you're being tested. Now, that is something I suspect you will become more comfortable with as you spend more time in this role. How long that will take might come down to environmental and individual factors, but I would suggest you'll be feeling a lot more comfortable 6 months from now than you are now. When it comes to things like how you're dressing and how you're presenting yourself, first of all, I say good, because as I've covered in other episodes of this podcast, I think dressing appropriately for the role is important. We know that there are psychological factors which do actually serve us as leaders. We know that there is such a thing as power dressing, where people do actually respond to you a little more as their leader subconsciously when you dress well, when you dress for the role appropriately. So I'm actually a big fan of taking care to present ourselves. I don't see that as a negative at all. I say embrace that and dress well and present yourself as a leader should. So I don't see that as a negative. The other thing that might help, I suspect, in this process is to perhaps zero in on what it is specifically that's giving you this imposter syndrome. Is it because you don't think that you have the required level of competency? You do seem to indicate in this question that you know you're doing a good job, so that to me suggests that you might be feeling one thing and then seeing evidence which suggests actually those fears might be misplaced. So that could be a good idea to focus on those wins. But I'd like to dig down a little bit more perhaps into what you think it is that is perhaps reinforcing these feelings of a lack in self-confidence. Is it because certain people around you are a little bit threatening to you? Do you think that other people in the organization might be seen as more suitable for this job? That was something that I picked up. You mentioned that somebody applied for the role and wanted the role, but it was you who was selected over that person. You might be anticipating a little bit of pushback from that person. Perhaps you are anticipating that other people might instead side with that person and think, well, why didn't that person get the role? That is quite common when it comes to new leadership positions, because they are usually hotly contested. But what I want you to do is focus on the fact that that person didn't get the role. You went through the process. It was done in a fair and equitable manner, and you were the successful applicant. And the reason for that, I suspect, is because you were the best applicant and you did the best job on the day. So I don't want you to sell yourself short. And as the reading that we did a little earlier suggested, I don't want you to be self-critical and assume that it was luck that got you there. It is, in all likelihood, because you were the better candidate that you are now sitting in that position. So let's just understand sometimes that our psychology, sometimes our brain likes to lie to us a little bit. You are probably the best candidate. So knowing that that is what it is, and you are actually doing a good job as per your own observations, let's perhaps double down a little bit on how we grow into this role and how we address all of the areas that we want to hit to be the best possible leader in this particular position. So what I want you to do is I want you to identify all of the shortcomings that you can come up with objectively with respect to doubts that you have about you being in this role. And I want you to put a bit of a plan in place to see if you can address those items. Now, you mentioned that you feared you perhaps weren't doing a good job, but then caught yourself and went, well, actually, objectively, I am. But I'm not convinced that there's not something below the surface there that is causing this doubt. Is it people related, as I said? If it is people related and you're worried that your colleagues perhaps feel that someone else is more deserving of the role, I want you to unpack that a little bit and maybe take some action that will help remove that doubt, because we know action removes doubt. So what does that look like? What I want you to do is I want you to start involving the wider team and bringing their ideas to the table. All right, so make it more of a collaborative sort of process driven leadership. So that might look like fortnightly team meetings, for example, where you bring all of these people together, including the person in your team who went for that job, and maybe you start getting other people's input and getting a vibe as to what people want to see and what they're thinking, and using that to help you formulate a good idea of what good looks like from the team's perspective. And in turn, will give you some low-hanging fruit and a bit of a target with respect to the direction that you take with this leadership position. I do think it's a mistake, and it is actually sapping from a confidence perspective to lead in isolation. That would be a mistake. If you've got, it's a mistake anyway, but especially if you've got these doubts where you're thinking, well, I'm not sure if the team's on board with me. Well, let's counteract that by getting the team involved. All right, make it collaborative. Ensure that their views and opinions can be put forward in a respectful and polite manner, and then harness that collective brainstorming power and factor it in to decisions that you make as a leader in that role. I don't know the exact setup of your organization and specifically the job that you're doing, but if you're at that director level, you absolutely have the power to do that. You should have managers under you. They will have leaders or potentially staff under them. Bring people together. You can bring your leaders together and just have focus groups with just them, or you can broaden that out to your just generic non-leadership staff as well. You are the director. You have the ability somewhat to do what you want to do. So I would say harness the views and opinions of others. And that will mean that you are hitting a few KPIs, so to speak, which I think are the hallmarks of a good leader. One, you're being collaborative. Two, you're being open. And you're also gauging the temperature in your team on a regular basis every couple of weeks. You're allowing voices and views and opinions to be heard, and that means that you're going to have a really good idea what's going on. And I would suggest to you that if you can do that, it will give you that subconscious comfort that you're someone with the finger on the pulse. You know, you're telling people it's a safe environment. You're giving the opportunity to open up. But there's something else I want to consider. Sometimes, if you are of sufficient seniority, people don't feel comfortable saying what they really think to you. Now, you might be at this director level and find yourself in that position. So what I want you to do, and this is really critical, is I want you to maintain that value of having your finger on the pulse, but perhaps negate the possibility that people are intimidated about talking to you because of your position. And I want to emphasize that this is regardless of your demeanor and how nice you are as a person. You can be the nicest person in the world, but if someone thinks that you're just of, too much seniority in relation to them, they might feel uncomfortable. It's not uncommon. It's not a reflection on you, it's a reflection on people's insecurity about being inferior. So that's where your middle management crew become really important. So make sure that you explain to those managers under you, so between you and the people on the floor, make sure you explain to them that you want to keep your finger on the pulse and that you want them to let you know about problems. And you will find that those middle managers are often in positions where people will open up a little bit more to them than they would to you. So middle management is super valuable. And you guys, at director level and middle management level have to be talking really clearly and be on the same page with respect to where you're going as an organization. So I would say try those two approaches, figure out which one works best, and make sure you lean on your middle managers to keep your finger on the pulse. So essentially, this is a bit long-winded with respect to an answer to this question, but there's a few things. Number one, understand where the feeling of imposter syndrome comes from and why, and as a part of that, make sure you take comfort in the fact that it's not uncommon, and in fact there's a deep-rooted evolutionary reason behind it. Secondly, understand that it's actually not necessarily a negative thing, because it means your state of being on high alert and making sure your standards are really bulletproof. It actually means that you're probably going to do the role better, because that anxiety and that stress is driving higher standards, right down to the way that you present yourself for work, which I actually love. I think that's a great thing. So that's not necessarily a negative, all right? Might feel stressful, but that's actually an example of good stress. Thirdly, let's focus on the fact that you're going to feel different 6 months from now than you do right now. This is just a transition period. We said when you get out of your comfort zone and you get into that area where you're going, geez, this feels a bit uncomfortable, that's your growth area. So we like that. That's signs of progress, and this discomfort is temporary. And then lastly, I want you to perhaps quell some of those fears you might have about, competitor applicants who went for the same role not being on your side, and maybe other people within the organization or in your own team feeling the same way, i.e. that someone else should have got the role. I want you to mitigate those fears by keeping your finger on the pulse and showing people that you're listening and you're willing to bring them along on the journey and take on board their feedback. Having that knowledge and getting a good vibe for what people underneath you are actually feeling and thinking will go a long way to making you feel better about your standing in the group. Showing you're collaborative, showing that it's not just your way or the highway, and that you're actually really willing to leverage the knowledge and experience of the team under you is super important. And that'll make you feel better in the long run, because it will feel like you've got a real good handle on your team and the mood in your organization. What we don't know hurts us from an evolutionary perspective. So you'll find subconsciously that settles you down quite a bit. If you can't get that feedback reliably because of your seniority at a director level, quite possible, make sure you're leaning on your middle managers to glean that information for you so that you can pivot and adjust. Okay, guys, we're going to leave it there. What a great question. Reddit is a real treasure trove for this sort of stuff. So thank you to that person for that question submission. That was really cool to dig into. Guys, as I always do, I'll encourage you to subscribe to the show if you're getting value from it. Very, very cool to see listeners popping up from all over the world, Europe, USA, New Zealand, Australia, and many other places. And look, I need your help, guys, to grow this show. It is a tough slog as a small podcaster. Growth does not come quickly. So if you're getting value, not only subscribe and leave a nice review, but I'd really appreciate it if you would tell people about the show and spread the word if you think they would also get value from it. Share it on social media. Do all you can to help the show out so that we can boost the standard of leadership globally. But until next time, crew, thanks so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next week.